We're 2/3 of a group called Little Big Men. And we're going to start with a song that I wrote just sitting around one afternoon, hating George Bush, wondering what I could do about it. And here's what happened.
Looks like a coalition of the willing to me. A real coalition. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. The man he mowed it, boom, boom. Congress voted, boom, boom. Guns were loaded, boom, boom. Bombs exploded, we were the winners. We ate our dinners watching evildoers blown away. Boom, 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 yeah. Boom, boom, attention shoppers, boom, boom. He told some whoppers, boom, boom. Pulled out some stoppers, boom, boom. Stepped off some choppers, military fervor, led by a deserter. We bought it, now it's time to pay. America, America, he shed disgrace on thee. Boom, boom, Bush and Bin Laden, boom, boom. Both talk to God and boom, boom. Both like jihad and boom, boom. We got a problem, they never blew it, 'cause God told them to do it. They'll repeat it till our dying day. Boom, boom, how's this the style? Boom, boom, drop a pile, boom, boom. Miss by a mile, boom, boom. Live in denial. You might think this phylum belongs in an asylum, but I'm afraid he's president. Please show some pity, join the committee to re-defeat the president. Help us re-defeat the president. And we have a lot of apples around there, and most of them get picked, but a fair amount are still left on the trees to attain the state known back home as rotten ripe. And they're not much good for anything. They still look pretty good, but they're losing all their value, and they're finding it hard to still hold on to the tree. And of course, soon they're going to fall and splat against the orchard floor. I am using that theme in this song called Rotten Ripe. Carelessly. Deception is no small obstruction. The only weapons of mass destruction were the lies he told you and me. I'm talking about entitlement so rich and fine, we pay him a fortune to rob us blind. When we are gonna doubt the shine of gold, shameless silver spoon. A few stars may darken from Halliburton and voice down. All the world could have a few simple things if America would live within the planet's means. Now we're carried on the mountaintop, opportunity abounds. How come all we want to do is throw our weight around? Mow some weakened country down and call it victory. We say our God is with us fully, but show me where it says, blessed are the bullies, America. The biggest enemy is not across the sea. Our biggest rock and ride. Oh, my friends, are we rotten right to fool ourselves and hold on tight to be far rotten right? Letting go of the truth to pick this fight. Did we fall rotten right? We will make amends, we will turn the tide, we will start again. Clouds will roll away, sun will soon be out. You and I will finally learn what love is all about. Tables will be turned, tears will be cried, lessons will be learned, hands will be joined, hearts will be bound, doors will open wide, the walls will tumble down. Changes will begin, stages will be set, when everyone forgives, everyone forgets. Justice will be served, mercy will be shown, secrets will be shared, armies will go home, hate will turn to hope, prisons turn to dust, anger turn to love, rifles turn to rust, flags will not be waved, stones will not be hurled, love will fly away, all around the world, hate will turn to home, prisons turn to dust, anger turn to love, rifles turn to rust, flags will not be waved, stones will not be hurled, love will fly away.
He was in Vietnam in 1969, and he was a U.S. Marine Corps lieutenant.
Jim Brown.
He was wounded in action and received the Purple Heart and Combat Action Ribbon. Please help me welcome Jim Brown.
Soaking wet, and truly the leader of the peace movement and justice. Annie asked me to say just a few words about Veterans for Peace and what they stand for. And I have a whole list of things right here that they stand for, but what they really stand for, and let me make it real clear, is veterans who have served their country and they're back in civilian life. They are, just because they've served in the different services of our country, does not mean that they are members of the military-industrial complex that is running our country. It does not mean that we believe it's a great thing to jump into war after war after war and use up our natural resources and kill our young children. We need to stand up and use our voices as veterans and say, can we at least tell the truth about what's going on here? Can we at least have a dialogue about feasible ways to handle situations in the world without putting an army all around that country before we start that dialogue? These are the kind of things that we stand for. One of our main things that we do as Veterans for Peace, we feel that it's important to stand up and show what the public costs of war are. And tonight, we have two speakers who are really going to be able to show this program to you. And through their personal experience, they're going to talk about the cost of war in the form of atrocities that happen during wartime and even in peacetime right in our own country. The greater atrocity is that these things are covered up. When our soldiers have been involved in atrocity, when they've seen it, and they go to report it, they're going to tell you what happened in the instances they were involved in when they reported these things to the chain of command and what happened to them. So let me give a short bio on each one and we'll get to it. Our featured speaker is Dennis Stout. On my right, Dennis was a soldier and an Army journalist whose reports revealed the fighter during Vietnam in '67. Dennis provided central documentation for the 2004, this very year, Pulitzer Prize for the Toledo Blade for their series of investigative reports that showed the atrocities committed back in 1967 by the Tiger Platoon in Vietnam. These troops are out in the field. They were not managed properly by their officers. They were left out in the field, and they committed atrocity after atrocity. It was a unit gone out of control. There's no supervision from the chain of command. Dennis was put right into the situation, and his stories tonight will terrify you, and they will illuminate you on what can be done about it as well. No less a speaker tonight is the Reverend Dorothy Mackey. She's a veteran of the United States Air Force. She was a captain and a commander. Presently, she's the executive director of Survivors Take Action Against Abuse by Military Personnel, and she will reveal the culture of sexual violence in the U.S. military. She was instrumental in breaking open the Air Force Academy rape scandal of 2003. A survivor herself, she addresses her experiences in the hope of creating global peace and harmony, and you will feel the compassion of her message. So ladies and gentlemen, let me present Dennis Stout and Dorothy Mack.
Well, I really enjoyed that music too, and I think if we're going to win this fight, it's going to take musicians, poets, and comedians, and cartoonists to help. Thank you more than all this talk. Well, my name, as you heard, is Dennis Stout. In 1966, I enlisted in the Army. I enlisted airborne infantry, and I put in for helicopter pilot, but didn't get it. But became a paratrooper, and was sent to Vietnam to serve with the 1st Battalion, 327th Infantry of the 101st Airborne. And for the first 6 months, I was an infantryman. I'd been trained as a mortarman, but we couldn't fire them because of overhead cover from all the jungles. So we became infantry, and for the first 6 months, I was an infantryman. And after my second minor wound, they found out that I used to freelance or attempt to freelance magazine articles, so they asked me to be a reporter for the battalion. That allowed me to fly into different companies and usually spend a week with each one. And I wound up spending a lot of time at Tiger Force because they were the best source of stories. I had to turn in two stories a week, and they were the best source of stories. But they weren't the only ones doing this. The entire battalion was committing this type of atrocity. When we were called the Vagabond Unit, our brigade was called the Vagabond Unit, because if we went more than 5 days without significant enemy contact, they would pull us out of where we were and put us into a new spot where we could find more enemy. The reason for that was that we were a promotional unit for West Point officers. Our former commander was General Westmoreland, and when he moved up to command all the troops in Vietnam, the MACV command, he sent people that were West Point qualified and infantry qualified down to our unit. And since there were very few airborne units in country, they cycled through our unit real quickly. We had lieutenants usually, if they lived, they stayed with us 4 months. And we weren't killing them, the enemy was. But the lieutenants usually spent about 4 months with us, and captains 4 to 6 months, and then light colonels, bird colonels, about 45 days. And then generals, we got a new general every 30 days. And in that time period, they had to get their numbers right to get their promotion, which meant getting enough enemy body count or weapons captured to get their promotion. One colonel, when he came in, our unit number was first 327. He wanted 327 enemy killed that month, so it would make a newspaper story for him and he'd get some publicity. But we got him that many kills by the 18th of the month. And there was low levels of war crimes going on until in May of 1967 we were moved to Quang Ngai province in the Song Bay Valley. And this area, we'd never been in an area like this before. It was a wide farming valley. We were usually up in the mountains. And it was called a free fire zone. And our colonel gave us a lecture telling us that we had to deprive the enemy of their resources. And any civilians in the valley were resources they could use to grow rice, carry loads, dig holes, so we had to deprive them of that resource. Our instructions were to move through the valley, not allow anyone to move in front of us because they might tell the enemy we were coming. Not let anyone pass through our lines because they might pick up weapons and attack us from the rear. We couldn't keep them with us because they said it would slow us down and no evacuation would be provided. And he ended the thing by saying, when you leave this valley, there will be nothing left alive in the valley. We chopped down the fruit trees, put blocks of poison down the wells, killed all the animals, killed all the people, and burned all the houses. And we had never been in an area like that before. So we found out that this was rewarded. The people who did this sort of thing got the rewards. You know, I'll get into later how that works, but in 1967, after a young girl was raped for 2 nights and then killed, I finally had enough, and I walked across country for several kilometers, and went to the American base to report the war crimes. And I was told to follow the chain of command, so I went to my sergeant major, told him what was happening, and he said, keep quiet about this or you get a lot of good people in trouble. So I went to my captain, and the captain told me to keep quiet about this or I could get in trouble. So I went to the chaplain because I thought the chaplain would care about this. And once a month, he got to fly to Saigon to a chaplain's conference. And while he was there, I thought he could tell the criminal investigation division, the detectives of the Army, to come up and investigate these crimes. But instead, he turned me into the sergeant major as a troublemaker. So I was called back into a meeting just several hours later, and I was, the meeting, they said, Stout, if you didn't have such a good combat record, you'd be dead already. If you say one more word about this, you won't come back alive for the next operation. He said, do you understand? I said, yes, sir. He said, that's all. So I left. So I kept quiet through the rest of the time I was in the war, and I was sent back to Arizona to Fort Huachuca. I finished out my time there. And then when I got out of the Army, and it was 1969, and just a couple weeks after I got out, the My Lai incident broke. And they were saying it was an isolated incident, just a few rogue soldiers, you know, the thing you've been hearing lately. Well, I knew that wasn't true, and I came forward with my war crimes. I stuck to the 8 that I could most closely document. You know, I didn't want to make things that they could dismiss, so I stuck to the ones where I had ID cards of some of the people killed, the location on the ground within 50 meters, and the name and unit numbers of the people that committed the crimes. And I had 8, and I'm just going to name them, because instead of getting into them, but the rape and murder of a girl who was about 16 or 17, raping her for 2 nights and then blowing her up with a hand grenade and then shooting her. One guy tried to skin an old man. He wanted to see what it was like to skin someone. A prisoner was captured and tied to a tree, and then the sergeant used an axe to start chopping him apart from the bottom up. Shooting of an old woman that could barely walk, and was just no danger to anyone. The killing of 35 to 50 people who tried to save themselves by bunching themselves up in a rice paddy. And the guys started to shoot them. They were all, as in all cases, they were mothers, little kids, and old people. No one of military age. So the colonel landed his helicopter, and I thought, oh, he'll put a stop to this. And he came over and locked the lieutenant in what's called the brace, which is a position of extreme attention. And he said, don't you know better than to kill those people out here in the open? You take them over in the bushes and kill them. So they started shooting them and dragging them into the bushes. The killing of 3 surrendering enemy, the killing of a young father in front of his wife and his 2 little girls, strangling a wounded enemy by the medic, and then injecting one prisoner with swamp water and air to see if they could be killed. After I reported these things, I was told no investigation was done because it was behind enemy lines. And my senator at that time, Senator Udall, Morris Udall, wrote letters to the Army, and they claimed I was totally uncooperative, wouldn't help in their investigation, and so no investigation was being done. When actually we learned later that word went immediately to the White House, an investigating team was sent to Vietnam, did over 100 interviews, and compiled a stack of documents 3 feet high, including sworn testimony. They substantiated every charge I made and found a lot more. I reported 8. They wound up finding 18 in that investigation. So then, through the years, I kept sending requests for information, being told no records existed. Last year, some friends in Toledo called me and said, those stories you keep telling, they're in our newspaper. the Toledo Blade. So I emailed the Toledo Blade and said, you know, I'm Dennis Stout. He said, you're the guy. We've been looking for you. We keep running into your name in these records. So the 3 reporters, Mike Stala, Mitch Weiss, and Joe Marr, have done, I think it's a 15-part series by now. They won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism last year. They spent 2 years on the research before they even began writing, and now they're doing a book on this. The Army, under pressure, started a reinvestigation. They don't call it interrogating now, they came to interview me for 5 hours. So it actually turned out pretty well because I had gotten some of my original documents from the National Archives, which they didn't know about. And when I asked them, have you been able to find it in my original investigation, they said, no, we can't find it at all. And I said, well, I made a copy for you here. They were quite interested, and in there it gives reference numbers. When a fact is given, they give cross-reference numbers to other investigations. So there was no way they could deny this existed anymore. Well, the reinvestigation recommended prosecution of 18 Americans for 23 war crimes because it turned out the rape, for instance, I had reported committed by C Company. They investigated B Company and found 2 similar incidents in B Company. So it expanded the list of war crimes that they were searching for. I've had some help from Senator John McCain and Dennis Kucinich, but the military has stopped responding to them. They won't even answer their letters or acknowledge them now. So we're getting no further help on that. My original investigation was continued until it was killed by Donald Rumsfeld when he was Defense Secretary under Gerald Ford. He had been Deputy Secretary for a while, and I'm sure he was aware of this. In the month that he took office, he killed the investigation. The reinvestigation has gone up the chain, from the detectives to the prosecutors. The prosecution's recommended to the Secretary of the Army. It's back on Donald Rumsfeld's desk again. I don't have a lot of hope for action in the light of recent things, but we were given both. The problem in this sort of thing is that, and with the Abu Ghraib thing, people are given both verbal orders, the written orders, and then verbal orders. The written orders tell you not to violate things, but the verbal orders tell you to, you know, what you're supposed to do. And then if you get caught, they can say, oh, we gave him written orders that he shouldn't do that. And that's what I feel they're doing with this Abu Ghraib thing. They're going after privates and sergeants. I'm not saying they shouldn't be punished, but this goes all the way up the chain of command. The idea that these people could be in a military, and any of you that have been in the military know that the most intimate relationship in the military is between a platoon sergeant and platoon. The next one is from a lieutenant and his platoon. The idea that a lieutenant would not know what his platoon was doing for 5 months is just beyond any belief. This cannot be possible. And that a captain wouldn't know what his lieutenant wasn't doing. I mean, and even if they didn't know, they're still responsible under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for anything that happens in their command. These claims that they're making now are totally irresponsible, and they're going after these people for, well, the convictions we have so far, the one this week was the guy gets 8 months for these war crimes. Martha Stewart's serving 35 for stock manipulation, and he gets 8 months. But I think he's made a deal not to bring the generals in to testify for a lesser sentence. That's just my view on this. I have no knowledge of that, actually. But, you know, they need, in my case, if my first complaint had been followed up and they had come down, as we say, with both boots on 6 people, My Lai would have never happened. My Lai happened about a year to a year and a half later in the same valley where we were operating by a different unit. If they had hit just 6 people at that time, this would never have occurred. And today, if they went after the commanders in this unit, this stuff couldn't continue. But they've actually given tacit approval to all of this. It's their pattern to do this, to cover up and in secret give approval to do this sort of thing. Fly people to third countries to torture them. This is their pattern, and you're going to hear a lot more about this from Dorothy. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to her. She's going to give you information on another group of Americans and that are being abused and killed and crimes covered up. So I'll turn it over to Dorothy Mack.
I hope you guys have your seatbelts fastened. My story. I was a captain and commander, so I can absolutely say the genesis correct. As a commander, you have to know what's going on below, and you're required to be responsible. But my story, I began my military career in 1983 through 92. In the first 5 years of my service, I was raped 3 times, twice by military doctors during mandatory examinations. There was no place to go. As a commander, I was in what's called quality of force meetings, where we looked at the criminal behavior of the men on our base, all individuals on our base. And in that meeting, there were 5 child molesters who had more than enough evidence to put them all in prison, and yet they only convicted the minority African-American man and sent the others home to where they were sexually abusing their children. Also, as a commander, I had the opportunity to have an NCO, non-commissioned officer, come to me, and we were in Germany, and he told me that our own men were purposely targeting our women to get them drunk, to then rape or gang rape them. As commander, I went immediately to the legal office, to the prosecutors, and I reported this to her. And she refused to investigate. She refused to even look into it, saying that they had had alcohol. I then went to the leadership. I let the wing commander and all the assistants know about it. And yet I was called in and asked about it if it was true, and I said, yes, sir, it is. And they did nothing to protect the women. In my last assignment, 1991 to 92, I worked directly for a full colonel known as the Inspector General, which is the complaint system, a 3-star general and a 1-star. During that time frame, I was what I call tag team assaulted. For a year, I was subjected to humiliation, abuse, mental, emotional, physical, and sexual. I was groped and grabbed. I was threatened to be put in the psych ward against my will. I was threatened with immediate retaliation on my career. I witnessed as there was child abuse, as domestic violence was ignored, as a crime in which a woman had to defend her children from an abusive husband who was raping her children and her. And when she took action to keep her children safe, the military refused to turn over the domestic violence records and let her go to prison. Now, I had to leave the service because I could no longer take it. And I had a subordinate come to me and said, Captain, if you do not leave this job, those 2 men will kill you. I knew that was true, or I knew I would be raped again. And so I left. But I just didn't leave. You see, I went all the way to the president. I went to another president, and I also went to Congress and forced an investigation in which they tampered with the evidence and changed the evidence and simply made it inconsistent and threw the claim out. Well, I'm a bit tenacious, so I found an attorney, and we took them to court, suing them civilly after I had been denied help from the Justice Department 3 times. 5 days before we were to go to trial, the Justice Department stepped in to represent my assailants against me in a court of law. And we went all the way up to the Supreme Court. In the Cincinnati Court of Appeals, the Justice Department attorney stated, and I quote, "They could not bring my case for national security reasons. To do so would be a disruption of good order, morale, and discipline. I will also tell you that on this journey I learned the 5 immunity laws that give military members and the leaders immunity if they rape, murder, or maim their own or others. And there were 4 other military women's cases that had gone. Of the 5 of us, 3 are dead. 2 were driven to take their own lives. The one was stalked and murdered. She was a Naval Academy cadet. The leadership knew it and did nothing. Myself, and then a woman from the Aberdeen rape trial, Aberdeen Proving Ground, in which the leadership knew that these men were taking the women off to rape them, and they were given immunity. All of our stalkers, by and large, except the murderer, was given immunity. Now, you'd say that many people may think that I lost that trial because they were given immunity, and then we refiled against the U.S. Supreme Court. But I will tell you The second time around, when the immunity was given to the U.S. government, I found that I had a new voice, and that's why I started Stout. Please note, these are shirts behind me. These are actually done by all the victims. Of the 4,600 clients I have in this country alone, and thousands of overseas clients, they've all been abused, raped, assaulted in various sorts of ways. These are men's shirts as well as women, civilian. On the far right, this goes back 5 decades. The far right is a World War II veteran who was raped, and the military police caught her military rapist in the act of raping her, stabbing her in the genital area and hitting her in the head with a rock. The military police had the assailant take her to the hospital, where the doctors refused to even address her wounds and simply began writing paperwork to throw her out under being crazy. She still has never gotten justice. Of the 4,600 clients, only 3 prosecutions have ever occurred. The second client and the youngest, the small dress up there, is a 2-year-old. She was a survivor of a multiple rape by her military father, who's still in the United States Air Force, and then he turned her over to his other friends. The criminal investigators refused to investigate, refused to prosecute. This goes all the way to the top. You would ask, why would I know that? Ladies and gentlemen, I have what's called the McDowell checklist. This was actually put together by the Pentagon in the mid-80s through the 90s, used officially. It's 57 questions used and then trained to our military criminal investigators inside the military, and then also to the civilian police authorities, police, attorneys, and judges in the civilian communities, including San Diego. These 57 questions, McDowell's primary premise is that the victim must score below a 0 to be considered telling the truth. Let me give you a few of the questions. Does the victim report being abducted? A half a point. He must be below 0 to be considered telling the truth. So that person was over the threshold and is lying. Does the victim report offering vigorous resistance, fighting her assailant? That's 3 points. She's lying if she fought off her assailant. Does the victim report passing out or losing consciousness during the assault? That's a half a point. Even if you're given roofies, you're lying. Does the victim report waking up or coming to and finding her assailant engaged in intercourse with her? That's a half a point. She's lying if it happened. Questions go on that if the assailant had gloves on, wore a mask, used a knife, or had a gun. Those were each pointed questions, and if they had any of those characteristics, a gun, a weapon, they would get points. They're lying. They were not raped. I ran this by a national expert in rape. She said she's never had a client who could pass this. This is still unofficially being used. Currently in the forward deployed area, I've had 167 folks, there have been 167 women who've been sexually assaulted. I've had many of those clients come to me. They reported it. They attempted to report it. They refused to document these crimes. They often were threatened with being put in prison themselves. I had 2 male members, military members, who were also sexually assaulted in this forward deployed war zone. One, his mother was threatened to be murdered if he opened his mouth about it. And the second, after he was raped, he beat up his assailant, and when he went to the legal office, they threatened to put him in prison if he opened his mouth, and then threw him out of the U.S. military, keeping the rapist in the forward deployed areas. I've actually attended several of the U.S. congressional caucuses, and what I found most interesting is that from that caucus, they have said that in the last 16 years, there have been 20 task forces on sexual misconduct inside the military in which the Pentagon has refused to adopt any recommendation. The Congress has said themselves that the military keeps promoting the rapist internally. Now, is this just happening to our women? Absolutely not. It's happening equally to our men. Because you see, one of the biggest lies going in this country is that if men are raped, people believe it's gay-to-gay rapes. That's not the truth. From a Veterans Administrative Counselor, he found that 98% of all men raping men inside the military are heterosexual. So it's heterosexual to heterosexual assaults. And that one male rapist, heterosexual, would rape 250 men if they're ever caught or before they're caught. These men are being trained to do this. And this is also indicated by the fact of our international policy. The U.S. government refuses to sign the treaty making rape a war crime. The U.S. government has refused to sign the ICC International Criminal Courts Treaty unless our own military has immunity. And while Mr. Rumsfeld has stated publicly that he was very grateful that the pictures of Abu Ghraib came out, in the Taguba report it said that a female inmate was having sex with one of her detainees, military MPs. Well, the men were being threatened with rape and then sodomized. He has also ordered that no digital cameras or digital cellular phones are allowed in the forward deployed areas. He's not only redefined the Geneva Convention and what torture is, he's minimized it. He said that you had to do major damage to the body organ or kill a person. So what's that mean? That rape and abuse, electroshock is all allowed. This is putting our men and women in the forward deployed area at great bodily risk. Now let me just give you a few of the military members that have come out of the military and the impact to our communities. Jeffrey Dahmer, Berkowitz, DeSalvo, Yates, Francois from New York, Ridgway from California, the killer of Polly Klaas, Richard Allen Davis. These are all former military. And yet the Pentagon has known it, has sat on it and done nothing about it. And just wrapping up, General Karpinski, interestingly enough, has said it. She's the general that they're now accusing of being the scapegoat for allowing the abuses at Abu Ghraib. She has now come forward and said that when she reported our own military women being raped in the forward deployed areas to Sanchez and then to General Diamond, that they said pretty much, go ahead and shut up and sit down. We don't care. They weren't even willing to protect our own men and women in the forward deployed area. So we'll now go on with the next section. Thank you very much.
Each of us, we had to just give you a small slice of we could do several hours each on things here. We've had to give you a small slice so we can go on to questions. But so many things in our movement end on a negative note. So we wanted to say that there are ways to remedy these situations. Other military forces have ways to do this. They may not be perfect, but for instance, in the British Army, when soldiers commit crimes, the commanders are relieved. You know, it's not just the soldiers. Everyone up the chain of command is relieved. In Holland and Belgium, they have different rules for treating the women in their units. It's not like this is totally unexplored territory. Our military could take some of its own advice and use these foreign examples to change the way things are done. And what we're saying is if you have a rule, enforce it. If you don't enforce it, then you don't have a rule. You know, so that's pretty much our thing. We're going to have questions from the panel now.
I'd like to introduce the panel. I think it's, please stand up as I mention your name. Dale Kelly Bankhead. Dale is the Public Affairs Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of San Diego and Imperial Counties. Her background includes a broad array of public interest, advocacy, and political positions. Prior to the ACLU, she was legislative aide with California State Assembly in Sacramento. She has managed several political campaigns and worked on many more, including Peter Navarro for Congress and the Clinton Gore re-election campaign. Dale has held several volunteer leaders positions in community organization and has won numerous awards for community service. Dale is a graduate of Wesleyan College and also attended University of Miami's School of Law for 2 years. South America, he reluctantly became an anti-war activist during the Vietnam War while attending the University of Colorado. Since then, he has dedicated his life to social change and socialism, working in the Founders Union organizer and working as a news director in public radio and public TV. Since moving to San Diego in '81, he has taught courses in race and cultural relations and sociology at high school, college, and university levels. 5 years ago, Martin co-sponsored Active San Diego, a local communications and mobilization center. One of Active San Diego's recent campaigns is aimed at exposing San Diego defense contractors implicated in the torture of Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. Gordon Chang. I'm going to introduce some younger guys here. Gordon Chang is a doctoral student of sociology at UCSD. Previously, he was in the Education Against the War Committee at UCLA Grad School of Education, and now he's conducting research on the linguistic strategies by the Bush administration during the war in Iraq. And finally, Regina Carey has been an activist in civil liberties, human rights for over 35 years. She is the former chair of the Social Justice Center of Marin and board member of the Marin County ACLU. Currently, Regina is a campaign manager of Kathleen Calzada, 73rd Assembly Democrat. Each one of these people get the microphone in just a second, and they're going to ask one question that they have thought of to either one of the candidates. After this, we're going to open it up to public questions, and we'll take it from there. Regina.
This is a two-part question, and it's for both. Given that military is trained to be cruel and to dehumanize what we consider the enemy, could you define the enemy or the term the enemy? And in particular for you, Dennis, when you returned, how did you transition from seeing, quote, the enemy to seeing them again as a human being? And then what do you foresee for our returning soldiers from Iraq? Thank you.
Well, when I was there, anybody was the enemy that wasn't us. Anybody that wasn't the U.S. soldier was the enemy. And anybody who was dead was a BC, no matter what age, or anything about them. So I guess the precise answer is just anybody that wasn't us was the enemy. And how I transitioned back, that's going to be difficult to put quickly, but it's very difficult to come back. After being in it, it's a completely different world. This one seems like an unreal world. It seems like I didn't think I could ever live in this world, and I felt like going back to the war, because at least there I would know what was what, just a small example, when I was at Fort Huachuca, a sergeant who worked for me got a puppy. He was driving along, the puppy peed on the seat, so he reached over and choked it to death and threw it out the window. Then he turned his car around, drove back to the post, and signed up to go to Vietnam, to go back to the war. He thought he could never live in this life again. And I think the soldiers coming back from this war, it'll take a year or two before they begin realizing what they've been through, a lot of them. Some will have instant things, and some things will be years later. In Veterans for Peace, we're really familiar with this, and we're going to be here to help them. We know how to make this transition back, and it's not easy at all. It takes a lot of forgiving yourself. Getting rid of the guilt is one of the biggest things to deal with. Trying to get rid of the guilt of things. And it's a very, very hard process. In my part, my daughter was born while I was there. She saved my life, and I thank her for it, because I had to take care of her. And when I was changing her diapers and things, I just fell in love with her. And I couldn't go back and die in the war. I couldn't become a drug addict. I couldn't become an alcoholic. I had to take care of her. And she's the one that saved me.
Well, for me, and for many of my clients, because we're abused by our own, and often when we've gone up the chain of command, even to the civilian authorities, Congress, Senate, those folks, there's a great deal of hatred that builds up, because everything I understood from a child as far as democracy, and I studied law, I was a pre-law major, and I loved everything I ever learned about this country, but I had to learn that it was all a lie. because when you see it written and then you see it practiced quite differently, then I came to this place, and quite honestly, I was suicidal. I put a gun against my head, as so many do. And I had to find another way. Now, when I went to the VA, and please know that the Veterans Administration, there was a lot of really good people there doing great work. But that's not, unfortunately, the entire case. I, unfortunately, was re-abused there. Mentally, emotionally, ran through a gauntlet of doctors who didn't even help me. Was told by a psychiatrist he would not document what I told him. Thereby, to this day, I've never gotten disability. So I started looking for other alternative methods to come back. Because, and please know, what I'm going to share with you is what I experienced. With the shame and the blame and the ongoing isolation I was finding myself in, and paranoia that started happening, I got to a place where I was going to go out and hunt down the guys that did this to me. And by the grace of God, I did not. But it was alternative healing methods and stepping stone people that brought me back from that insanity. And I'm very blessed as an American to be born here. But I also have a social and moral obligation globally to what I have found out to stand up and do what's right for the hundreds of thousands of people I talk to around the world. So, great question.
The Bush administration is telling American stories right now regarding the torture scandal. And the story is that the soldiers went to Iraq and they want to free the people there. And then after the torture scandal broke out, the story is that, well, the soldiers are heavily demoralized, that the few bad apples did not understand American values or the way that American soldiers behave. And then any criticism should be very careful about it. And I wonder how the panelists would respond to it. Because the assumption is that the U.S. soldiers, most of them are very good people and try to be very considerate, and they have very tight bonds with each other. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts on it.
I'm not sure I understand the complete question. I heard the last part about the bond between the soldiers. Just before that, I missed that portion. Oh, a few bad apples? You mean, is it a few bad apples that did this?
Yeah, basically what I'm thinking about is that it is trying to paint the U.S. soldiers' characters as a very honorable people. And then they're saying that the U.S. soldiers are the ones who are exposing these torture cases, that they went to the war in order to free the people. So that they are basically trying to calm the criticism down by putting up the soldiers' good characters as a shield of the torture scandal. So I wonder if you think of, what do you think the picture of why these atrocities happen? What are the general state of characters of the U.S. soldiers and so forth?
Okay, well, when these sort of things happen, they can't happen, or they can't continue to happen without approval from the people further up. You know, like in my war, people, different units were different ways. Some units didn't commit war crimes, or other ones, like the Marine Corps, had a much better policy. When someone killed someone unnecessarily, they called them in and shooed them out and reduced their pay and sometimes reduced their rank. So they enforced the rules and they were upheld. Therefore, it didn't continue. But it sounds like in this case, these higher-ups wanted these things done to the prisoners. And when it was exposed, then they turned on them. And I agree with you that most of the soldiers over there want to do the right thing. I don't know if there is a right thing to do now. You know, it's very confusing. And I'm in communication with a Marine First Lieutenant over there now, and they're fighting with each other and for each other to keep each other safe and to get home. I don't know what the larger thing is to fight for there, but I have good confidence in them. They're wonderful people, And I always refer to them as our beautiful soldiers, you know. I don't want them harmed. And there are always going to be these things where they're encouraged. You know, the Army, especially in things like special forces or paratroops, select for sociopaths. They try to get people to be harder and colder and less feeling. And in that situation, many things can happen. Terrible things can happen. It's the training of the Army and the lack of enforcement of the rules that cause these things. They shouldn't cast things on every soldier. It shouldn't cast these doubts on every soldier. But the Army has to enforce the rules against everyone who violates it, or it will affect every soldier there. It's already affected them in their lack of safety, but it'll affect how people see them if the rules are not enforced.
I actually had a male client who was in the war prior to Abu Ghraib, and he shared with me that while he was not a prison guard at another prison, he was there doing other duties, that the CIA and prison guards would come out and brag about them sodomizing those prisoners and beating them. And he's more than willing to testify that it was happening before this. But one thing I would have to share with you is the thought that, can we really have 5 immunity laws that protect these type of offenses towards our own people, which then allows them to stay in the military, where they can go overseas and abuse foreigners around the world, even in wartime? Can we have the McDowell checklist that was put out by the Pentagon? I mean, this goes all the way to the top. You can't have those sanctionings by our court systems and by the Pentagon without the reality of, it's not a few bad apples down below, it's a whole lot of bad apples above. Okay?
My question actually is a follow-on to that, because as I was listening, I drew the conclusion that you were, time after time describing monsters, and not just special forces psychopaths, but you talked about chaplains and doctors. And so I'm hoping you can help us understand that a little better. First of all, what military purpose does it serve to have these kinds of things happen? Rape or torture or murder? And is it a chicken or egg? Are you a fine human being before you go in most cases, say a doctor or a chaplain, but there's an environment that changes who you are? Because I've known, lots of military people, and for the most part, they don't seem to be monsters to me. And this is just such huge proportion that you're talking about, that I just, want to try to understand it better. Is it the draft versus the volunteer army? Where is this coming from? Because I don't think it really reflects our society, or I hope it isn't.
Well, there's a lot to say about that. I've seen people become the monsters. And my opinion, and I don't have these numbers backed up by anything, but my opinion is that we had about 5% sociopaths that just found a wonderful home to be in, where they could kill and torture and rape and do everything they wanted and be rewarded for it. And then there were about 90% who would go with whatever was approved, and whatever was rewarded. I think that's been backed up by these studies they've done at universities, where they make one group of students the prisoners and the other the guards, and they see how those things occur very quickly. So I think there's about 90% will go along with what's rewarded and what's expected, and they want to please, and they want to be thought of as doing what they're supposed to do. And then there's about 5% that will not do it even on pain of death. You can threaten to kill them and they won't do it, no matter what. I don't know what causes that, but that's kind of how that part breaks down. But the way this is done, the reason it's done, the commanders are the ones that give this approval. When something occurs and they approve of it and give medals for it, give promotions for it, that just amplifies it and continues it. It's a constant thing that can occur in warfare. Both sides can do things to each other. This is the nature of warfare. So those things can occur, and it takes vigilance on the part of the officers to stop it from occurring, or it will take over. It will become a very animalistic kind of thing. And our unit was different because we were out there all the time. We got no rest in the rear. If our unit was reduced to only 27 people that could walk, we would be put together with another unit and sent back out. We weren't allowed to recuperate or reorganize at all. So it was a very hothouse environment where this thing became very intense. And it's difficult for these monsters to ever get back into the society if they realize they're monsters. It's very difficult. I'm sorry, did I answer your question, or is there more to it?
Well, no, I think you did, except that the more you talk, the more I reach the conclusion that it can't be stopped, because it's a culture that permeates so far up and down the line. And my question is, why would you give a medal to somebody who is a rapist, torturer, murderer, and what military purpose does that serve?
Oh yes, well, I think Dorothy can answer that. I didn't want to take her thing, but it really is to demoralize the civilian population. You want to demoralize the civilian population, and that's the overall idea of war. The bombing of cities during World War II, the things that was to demoralize the civilian population, and doing this kind of stuff to them. I think that's the military rationale for it, but it's the most admired thing to be the coldest, hardest person. It's hard to teach people to kill. The current army doesn't use the word kill. They use neutralize or overcome. They don't use the word kill because they're afraid people have a bad reaction to it. So they've eliminated it from their training. I'll let Dorothy go on here.
Let me just give you, and I'm sure many of you know this, but just some of the people that the American government has put into power around the world under the auspices of democracy. Muammar Gaddafi, Idi Amin, Baby Dr. Valier of Pinochet, Marcos, the Shah of Iran, and yet within, Noriega, but the list is long. The list is long and very deviant. And yet within 5 to 25 years, the American military have gone out and taken these people out, saying that they devastated their people. It's about destabilization for power and control. The Department of Defense said this past February that as far as rape, that the military had actually cut its rape rates down in half from 1950 to 2000. And yet I have information directly from the Department of Justice 1997 that stated the number one reason for military to be in prison was for sexual assault. It was 33% of them were in prison for sexual assault. On that same report, veterans in our civilian prisons, number one reason, sexual assault. It was 26% of military veterans were in prisons for sexual assault versus civilians that were only 11%. So rape and assault is far higher in the military. And those statistics have been shown again as of 2001 that they are far higher than the civilian population.
First of all, I really want to say how admiring I am of people who can turn 180 degrees and reorganize their world, and it's a great inspiration, a great hope for the rest of us that change is possible. What I want to ask is, how much has really changed in the last 20 years? 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to attend congressional war crimes hearings that were convened by Representative Ron Dellums in the Congress that went through a whole series of these very same charges on the public record, in the congressional record. And what I see is a repetition of a great deal of that. Those hearings, in many senses, helped me turn from a liberal into an anti-imperialist, believing that the fundamental nature of the way in which our country wages war is based on white supremacist ideas, you know, what we can do and the dehumanization of the enemy. And the three things that stuck with me from that time, you know, the three examples that really struck hard, you know, was contemplating what it meant to carpet bomb a country. I'm not just talking about the individual things, but the fact that we could carpet bomb North Vietnam and drop more bombs than were dropped in all of World War II on North Vietnam, mainly on civilian populations. You know, what Dennis mentioned as a free fire zone, the sanctioning of killing anything within an area of a country, you know, is, I would say, a war crime. And lastly, you know, the defoliation, you know, the conscious poisoning of not only the people, but the food supply and the deformation of a whole generation of people. How much has changed between now and then?
That's a pretty easy one, not much. They've learned to cover it up better. They don't allow the news people to run around loose in the battlefield. They're not allowing pictures anymore because they know pictures transmit really well. You know, there are pictures of me lying on that day, but a mile away, another village called Lai Kay, as many people were killed, but there were no photos, so no one knows about it. And there has to be some mechanism to trigger an investigation besides the shutter of a camera. So I don't think anything's changed. They've learned to control it a whole lot better and how to get on top of it right away and keep people, the story from getting away. Seymour Hersh, it's really good to read his stuff from the New Yorker. He says all during this, there were memos going back from the president to Ronald Rumsfeld to Cheney saying no one resigns, no one admits anything, stay the course. So they've learned to handle it. I don't think anything's changed. And there's no such thing as a smart bomb either. These things, we don't have a bomb yet that will hit a building full of people and kill only the bad people. At first, in the war, they say they hit the Ministry of Justice or something, and when most people were gone, but the janitor, I thought it was a war on janitors. They're killing the janitorial staff and these things, but you see, we don't have that capability yet. And anytime you stand off and use any weapons like artillery bombs, you're always going to kill innocent civilians. That's part of war. But that is always true, and we were counting, when we weren't in the free fire zone, we killed about 5 civilians for every enemy soldier. And most of them they didn't care who won the damn war, they just wanted to raise their kids and, you know, raise their rice and be left alone. So nothing really has changed. Sorry, long answer.
For me, what I found is that there has been some change. I agree absolutely with Dennis, but it's now become the congressional military-industrial complex. That while I've been to Congress and I've talked to many of them and put the McDowell checklist in their hand and shown them the evidence, they're very frightened as far as the power of the Pentagon, and they stated it. The Pentagon actually classified the videos of the rapes of the children, of the men, of the women. They've classified the documentation as well as the pictures, and they don't want it out. And it's time that we take back our country, non-violently, but it's time that we take it back. So nothing's been... Nothing has changed, but I'll honestly tell you, I actually am very grateful, and please hold your breath on this, for Bush and Rumsfeld, because this has been going on for decades, and yet they seem to feel that they can speak it now publicly and out loud, and that the rest of the world and we will simply sit on our thumbs and do nothing. And so there's a consciousness that's happening in which so many more people are becoming aware. So I think it's a great opportunity for a great deal of healing.
I want to thank our panel for asking these questions. Now we'd like to open it up to your questions. So anyone who'd like to ask some questions, come down these 2 aisles right here, and there's a microphone that we'll share.
My name is Leo Quirk. This question is, I guess, primarily for Mr. Stout. I'd be interested, Ms. Mackey has a response as well. In 1971, a Navy veteran named John Kerry, who's currently running for president, testified before the Congress. And apparently, I'm not real familiar with his testimony, but apparently he described horrific things going on in Vietnam. And I had the impression that he did not have first-hand knowledge of some of these things. But anyway, he described these. He's come under a lot of criticism. I don't know if the Swift boat veterans have criticized him, but I have the impression he's had a lot of criticism about this, and I think he's been called a traitor and that sort of thing. I'd be interested in if you know anything about his actual testimony, what would be your comment about Senator Kerry's testimony back then?
Well, back then, all I did was hear it on the news like everybody else, but I just thought it was, of course, that's exactly what's happening. I didn't think it was that unusual. I thought it was glad more things were getting out. So if your question is my reaction to his testimony, I thought it was good that it was getting out at that time. And I don't see that it, and again, this doesn't cast, this doesn't put all veterans were war criminals. You know, if they just prosecute the people who did it, the people who do this are the ones that are accusing everyone of being war criminals. The people that say, people like that are causing this, saying that you're saying everyone's a war criminal. No, some people did wrong things and they should be prosecuted if it can be proven. And unless we stick to that rule, there's not going to be any control on anything. We might as well say we're the same as Attila the Hun, or, you know, they had no war crimes because there were no rules. So we have to state it clearly. And it does not indict all veterans just because a few do this. And to try to put it that way is just a political ploy to get the veterans on their side instead of on the side of what's really going on.
Hi, I'm Jerry Scatmiller. I got a couple of AK-47 rounds in the right side of my face when I was in the Marine Corps. And I work with homeless and recovering veterans. I work with the combat vets with post-trauma stress. And I don't have a question. I have a comment. Forgive me, but the woman who talked about, who asked a question about the military people that she knows are not monsters. It's been my experience working with veterans for years that we as human beings have a capacity for darkness, and that war engages that darkness. And once that darkness has been engaged, perhaps the two speakers are familiar with Jonathan Shea, Achilles in Vietnam, and Odysseus in America. A veteran goes berserk. And there's been war crimes forever. War does this to human beings. And the other thing I want to say is the unidentified, unacknowledged, I think, person who does not want to be accountable are the American people. They do not want to hear. I remember when the movie Platoon came out, and many people came up to me, and they throw their arms around me, and they cry, and they hug me, and they go, I never knew. And I wanted to say to them, look at my goddamn face! It's like People do not want to acknowledge how ugly, how horrible, how vicious, how horrific war is. And the sexual, I'm just saying, war is ugly, and trying to find solutions cognitively, I think, is a waste of time. And I'll just leave on this one. In my experience, the only way out of this is by reconnecting with God's peace.
I love that. My name is Max Megas. That was beautiful. Just a quick word based on personal, your personal, your friends, your word of mouth, people you're in contact presently. How prevalent is percentage? What's a guess from the people you're in contact and you talk to personally, whether out in Iraq, Afghanistan, or elsewhere, as far as torture, rape, murder, atrocity?
I don't have enough information. I don't have enough people talking to me from there to know. So I can't give you an estimation of that.
I thought maybe you were in contact person.
No, I only have
So
about
that's
2
lieutenant.
people I know that are there, you know, in Iraq, and I don't have maybe Dorothy has more about it.
As far as the rapes, what I learned was the Pentagon tried to hold the line that there were only 50 rapes of our women in the forward deployed area. When I was asked, is this possible, and I said no, consider maybe 4 times that. Then they have since then acquiesced and said, well, we have 167. I can assure you that it's much higher based on the numbers of people over there. One of the reasons... I'm sorry?
One is too many.
Absolutely. But one of the problems we have is that all those in the forward deployed areas are not documenting when these individuals come forward to report these abuses. So there's no count, and that's one reason why I'm actively stating that what we need is an independent investigative agency outside the DoD, as well as the Justice Department, that has everything from a prosecution, medical, psychological component to it, all the way down to do the investigations independently. And they need like little SWAT teams in every region of the world and on bases that belong to this unit, so that if there's any leadership whatsoever that tries to either tamper with evidence, which they are doing, or refuses to allow witnesses to testify, they can immediately be taken off the base and prosecuted.
Yes, my name is Lady Hester. I'm Vietnamese, and I just wanted to say that I grew up under the war. I witnessed everything that you both mentioned tonight. My village lost 2/3 of the people from the war, and I founded 2 NGOs that worked in Vietnam since 1988 to help heal the wound of war as well as to rebuild the life in the country. And I'm just so grateful that you, as a Vietnam veteran, and speak out on behalf of the Vietnamese people. At today's, almost 30 years after the war, the Vietnamese people is still voiceless, nameless, and faceless. And you give a voice. Not only you give a voice, but you also go out and research and try to bring this horrible thing that happened in Vietnam. My question is, what should a veteran individual or a group, as well as the U.S. government, will do anything to help the Vietnamese people? Because after I read many of your reports, I went back into those villages in Quang Nam province to visit those families some family lost 7 children in the war. And many of them desperately need help. Did the U.S. government do anything to help them?
Yes, chuckle, come on. And this, well, what I'm doing is I'm gathering all the evidence I can of this, and the Toledo Blade guys are going to turn over what they've got. And I'm going to get it all together, and I'm making copies of it. One copy is going to Vietnam, to Nguyen Thai, who is the investigator of these things in Vietnam. He's a former colonel, and he now runs the Museum of Atrocities. And I'm duplicating all this to go to him and be filed there so that the people in Vietnam can use these documents to claim reparations, as the people did at No Con in Korea. And I'm also taking a copy to The Hague and filing it with the International Criminal Court. Because even though we've exempted ourselves from their jurisdiction, I want them to archive that information, because there's no statute of limitations on war crimes. And we can't let these people escape. People like General Westmoreland, all the people in the Pentagon, we can't let them get away with this. I'm the last living witness to 5 of these crimes. I can't let these go away. I have to get this on file. So I'm gathering all the information I can from veterans and from the newspaper, and I'm going to put this in. That's all I can do for this. Our veterans group sends veterans and non-veterans back every year to Vietnam to help build schools and do things to try to make things better there for the Vietnamese people. The Vietnamese government is not cooperating in this attempted prosecution because they want better relations. But the Toledo Blade, the reporters, say they get emails from the people of Vietnam saying, don't let this go, keep after it, don't let this be forgotten. And I can't let these people be forgotten either. They're very good people. And to see this happen to them, and to see this happen to the culture, as you said, so many people were killed. We found families where one uncle and the mother are trying to take care of 2 of those children and another one from another family. The families are so destroyed. And the basis of life in Vietnam is the family. And the families are so damaged. Now, one of our veterans, Billy Kelly, is in Vietnam now. And he emailed me from Vietnam, and he went to Quang Nai province and back to the Song Bay. And each village has a memorial out front. And each village lost at least half of their population to our being there. So all I can personally do is supply those records and try to help the Vietnamese people. But we have to go back and make some kind of reparations. The Agent Orange is continuing to kill people for generations. That's poison that just continues and continues on. And we do nothing to help it. We won't acknowledge them until they meet every one of our economic goals. And I can't keep our government from doing that. I will do everything that I can do.
Before I ask my question, which is about spreading the word of what you're talking about tonight, R.P. and Dennis, I really want to acknowledge your last questioner, Lady Hayslip. She's done a tremendous amount for doing what you're doing tonight about spreading the word with the East Meets West Foundation. She's going to write a book about it. Doing what you're saying needs to be done. And I really want to acknowledge Jim and Shelley, too, for bringing this together with a wonderful team of people. This hasn't been done before, certainly in my time in this town, and it is a real acknowledgement. Can do tonight, and what Dennis did with the Toledo news organization, the Toledo Blade. I used to live in Adrian, that's a wonderful town, but it's too small a vicinity to keep this knowledge. This should be across the world, certainly across this country, certainly across this damn village. Too much attempt to try to keep it secret, certainly by this government. And if there's a dime made, we need to break even tonight. There's a dime made here tonight. It should go back into spreading the word about what Dennis and Dorothy know and need to get out. And if we can help you to do that, you know people like Jim with Veterans for Peace and
Scully with North County Coalition for Peace and Justice, and Tyler Winter with the marvelous church here and the Peace and Democracy Action Group are going to help you to do it. I'm sure. Don't you think? Dennis, you know you're preaching to the choir. We need to get some people here who need to hear this. I've got cousins and relatives and students and so forth that need to hear this, that don't want to pause to listen to it. We're going to have to start rethinking how we do these meetings and take it out into this community.
When I traveled overseas, Okinawa, they have shared with me the terrible atrocities that have happened to their people. But they've done it in a very loving nature, and they've done it from a place of saying that we don't want this to happen to you because it happened here and it's going to continue. And so I promised them that I would continue. I have written The Hague and said, don't you find it interesting that the United States government demands of you to hold Milosevic accountable for the war crimes, Saddam Hussein accountable for the war crimes, and yet we will not stand by what we're doing. So part of what I've done and what I'm planning on doing shortly is taking the McDowell checklist and writing letters to the Department of Defense, the Justice Department, and to this president or whichever president ends up sitting, and saying that I'm demanding for crimes to be taken against McDowell and all DOD generals or leadership that allowed for the rapes of women and men in which they would not hold fully prosecution or prosecute fully the military members that were allowed to rape, because it really does start there. So I'm going to challenge them, and I've also got this information out to England and Holland. So they're very much working with us to unify us.
This story is a lot bigger outside of this country. The people in Europe know about it. It's a big story in Russia. It's a big story in Asia. We're the ones inside the bubble. We're the ones it doesn't get out to. The Toledo Blade does this thing, wins a Pulitzer Prize. It doesn't get picked up by very many places at all. Another little family newspaper in Maine runs the series, and that guy's there. Night News with Aaron Brown flew a crew to Vietnam to interview the survivors, did all this, worked this up, worked it into an hour show. It still hasn't been shown, and the producer says they can't show it because it might appear to be disloyal, so they can't put it on the air. Dateline's been wanting to do this. There's a woman that works for Dateline that's been wanting to do this since last November because her sister works for the Toledo Blade. And her editor keeps saying they might lose market share if they put something like this on. So much for crusading journalism. We don't have much of it anymore. This, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but you know, I've got some more preaching to do. The thing is that we can't let them portray us as the unpatriotic people or the un-American people. You know, these guys that are in power refused to serve the country when they had the chance. And now they sent our beautiful soldiers to a war for no reason. And they're dying and having their arms and legs ripped off for no reason. Their families are being tortured back here for nothing. And these people want to call us the unpatriotic people. You know? We're the ones that support the real values of America, not those guys. Those guys don't represent, they're trying to divide us against each other. We've got to split right down the middle. They're the ones causing the problem. They're the ones who are un-American. They're the traitors to our country, not us.
Sandy J. and A, thank you for the work you're doing. And B, would you care to comment, please, on the privatization of the military, where there's not even the pretense of accountability? That needs to be addressed at that.
Yes. So my nephew just got back. He's in a Marine helicopter unit. They do the maintenance. And by the time they left the war, they had only 3 flying helicopters because they have to depend on parts coming through this new privatized system. And they couldn't get parts to keep the helicopters. They couldn't even get side panels. They were patching them with beer cans. They can't get the things they need. And they wouldn't even let them get them. Relatives are offering to send them the parts, and they won't let them take them. You know, we have And the Marine sniper I told you about that's there now, and I'm in communication with him. They have magazines that don't feed the rounds right, and every third round jams. So they had to get a group here called Adopt a Sniper to send them the right magazines so they can continue to operate. This private supply thing isn't working because they can't get the trucks through. They can't get them up the roads. They can't helicopter everything in. Stuff has to come by road. And Kellogg Brown and Root, the subsidiary of Halliburton, they've been running trucks up the road because they get paid per trip. One of the truck drivers said out of 57 trucks, they only had 3 with stuff in them. And the rest of the cargoes were marked with the letters MT for empty, because they were getting paid per run. And the drivers are willing to carry anything the military needs, but they were being told to run up and down the roads empty to pile up the money for them. This is a way to take money away from people and put it in the corporation's pockets. Another way to do that. That's what they're doing. They're not providing for our troops. The troops are not getting what they need. And that I do have heard, because I have a nephew, and, well, in fact, I have 2 nephews now, and one's going back in about 12 days. That helicopter guy's going back in about 12 days. So that isn't working at all. This privatization is just a way to funnel money from the taxpayer to the corporation, and they don't have to actually do the work.
Is that all over or just in certain areas?
I don't know. All I know is the areas they were in. I don't know about the rest of the war. You know, he was just a helicopter maintenance unit, and they were I guess, west of Baghdad, and they weren't getting their parts. They couldn't keep their craft in the air. And the sniper unit is out on the western border, near the Euphrates River, where it crosses into Syria.
But they made me a contract negotiator for them. Part of that was that I witnessed in 3 incidents with F-15s, F-14s, the Navy Tomcat, where they put in bogus parts into those systems, where they had bad chips in them. And when I went to the leadership of Grumman and said, do you understand what this is going to do for national security? An F-14 will protect 130,000 military members in the Navy fleet. And this gentleman said, I have a son, but I make more than enough money that my child will never have to be in the military. When I reported it to the leadership of the Air Force, they threatened my mom. Again, as Dennis said, one of the reasons that they are privatizing is that it's harder to track the money. Even when our military members were dying in airplanes that they didn't have to die in, the government was hiding the information so that parents were not aware that their children were being killed in bad airplanes or with bad equipment. So it's simply a shell game, and they all well know too good how to play it.
Jim, I kind of lied. There's going to be 2 more questions. Fernando is going to be the last question.
All right, my name is Fred Kellum, and I was a draftee in 1970, and I'm not quite as gung-ho as Dennis was, where he's a airborne paratrooper, but I was in the infantry. I was in the 101st, and I was in the 3rd of the 506 Infantry in 1970. So the division was sent to I Corps, and what the area that you're talking about is in 2 Corps. Is that where that is located? Okay. But you said you were going to mention names. Do you include Colonel Hackworth in this chain of officers that should be responsible for what happened?
Well, Colonel Hackworth was the guy who created Tiger Force. But I don't know much about him. I came into country under his command, but he left just about 2 weeks after that. So I wasn't there during his command, but he was the creator of the Tiger Force and the concept of it.
I can just jump to conclusions that it was, his atmosphere that helped create that what you're talking about, I would think.
Yeah, I wasn't there when it was created. I'm not sure if it mutated or if it was actually created to do those things, because I just don't have the time overlap in the sequence to know that, I don't know what his intention was in creating it, whether that was it or whether it mutated into something else. So I don't really know what happened right then, when it was created. because I can't relate to that.
But I was going to say that when I came in country, I don't know if the division had changed because of what had happened to be exposed, but there was more of a program to soften the attitude, I think. Like they mentioned something like not to call Vietnamese gooks and something like that. And I don't know if the mood switched in later years or not, but I feel grateful that I was never a part of anything like that. It was just, it upset me when you explained what had happened and to wear that division patch. I was almost ashamed of it.
Well, you can be proud of your service. You didn't take part in any of that.
Yeah,
and
but I mean,
it
was pretty, even though I was, infantry and in country, it's still an eye-opener for me.
Yeah, and different times in the war are completely different. People who came, I was there 66, 67. People who came in 68, it was a different war. People who came in 70, it was a different war. Because things continued, the troops coming in were more informed. We were there to fight communism. We believed in the whole thing a lot more, and we admired our officers and things like that. People who came in later were better informed, so they had different attitudes. And the military changed its location, moved from a free fire zone on up to other areas. So I think things continue to change, and so that's why your experience of the unit was different than mine.
Yeah, I agree.
You mentioned Colonel Hackworth. I had the experience of being on the first TV show with Colonel Hackworth. There's something called misinformation and disinformation, which is typically associated with the U.S. government, that they'll put out information to confuse the real facts. The first time I met Colonel Hackworth, we were on a television show about women and rape in the military, and off camera he said to me, "You deserve what you get." I hope since that time that he has had a significant emotional and spiritual change. However, I don't know whose side he's really on, because when he was on Oprah Winfrey's show with the Fort Bragg murders, I found it very interesting that given the amount of information that he has, that he's actually able to get in and talk to the senior leadership in a lot of their charm schools. He's given almost facade-ish type of resolutions of, to debrief these people coming home. And yet, a lot of the information I'm getting from combat veterans coming home is that a lot of it is pencil whipped. They often don't get into these classes to really get debriefing. They don't even have support people enough to be able to handle the overload coming in. So I'm not sure who he is, but I hope he's really changed. I'd rather be cautious on that side with him.
Before I give the microphone to Fernando, it was asked if there was any way that copies of the documentation could possibly be given to military personnel or parts of the audience where they could then disseminate them to other people so that they could get this information out. So I know that we're going to be moving out to the patio for additional questions, but that is an important question that was brought up, so I just wanted to pass that on, and you can address that after.
I am sorry for getting the microphone at that moment. I have it's a question, it's a petition. Right now in my organization, the Rorosteca, we are receiving every day demands for military people or families for help. The boy is in the hospital and the wife not receives money, or the wife is in the jail because he's ready for deportation, and the military member is 23 years in the military service, and nobody helped. I don't have a power for help, or everybody call me for demanding help. The problem is this one. The military people inside the military base and the family outside don't have any idea what number or what place need the court for help. No government help. Need the civic help. And we don't have a national telephone number. It's a lot of small groups around the country. But the small groups don't have the same power when we make the full group, the one national group. This is my petition. It's beautiful to information. I know everybody here is supervised for this immoral war. Everybody here is the victims for Brussels and Bush. Everybody here. I lost my son, the other people lost their father, or something. We need maybe one big unit for working together, not different groups.
Tonight you've heard some rather amazing stories. I'd like to say that you can validate these stories. It's not hard. Dennis's stuff, he's not Wishman-Dixie when he says it. He's the one who was the main source of these materials. The Toledo Blade won a Pulitzer Prize on the information that he had. They researched it. And the Pulitzer Prize people researched their information. They didn't want to pass out laughingly. So if you just look up ToledoBlade.com, you can get this information downloaded and pass it to anyone you want. Same thing for Dorothy. She has a website available. She's researched this stuff. She's a professional about this. Her facts stand true. People have asked tonight, well, how can you change this? Because I know we're talking to the choir, and I know Dennis said, well, I want to keep talking to the choir. But you can change the system. And what you have to do is you have to plant seeds in the minds of the people who give you the worst time. I've got the worst neocon brother-in-law in the world. But, I can plant seeds in that guy, and one of my neocon brothers is going to turn around and vote for Kerry. He says, I think we need to change, he says. The other one is still teetering, but you need to plant the seeds. These people are giving you the seeds. They are telling the truth. And you can pass this on to all the people who give you the worst time of it. I want to give you a couple of announcements. One of them, a lot of you people who would like to help the different organizations in back, they're all tabling. They'd like to get you on the list. Please stop at their table and see what they're doing and sign up and see if they can involve you in the work that they do, which is fine work. Number two, after we leave here, these shirts up here, we want you to come up and take a look at it. We're supposed to get out of this church, the Rumsfeld, that weren't brought up tonight. When he came in 1975, he was the Secretary of Defense, and he literally squashed the entire investigation that was done. Not only Dennis's investigation, but the Army investigation. When he came in, he squashed it. Okay? So now he gets into the Bush administration as Secretary of Defense. This has come up again. Since they won the Pulitzer Prize, it's out again. He has literally squashed it again. The same guy 35 years later. In 1980, when Reagan was president and we were at war with Iran, Mr. McNamara was the fair-haired guy who went over there and set up a chemical plant to produce weapons of mass destruction that we allowed him to use on Iran. I know because Mr. Bush has the receipts. This is all fact. I don't know why people don't talk about that a bit more. This is the kind of guy who does not open himself up to any question. Here are two major atrocities that we don't talk about here tonight, and I think we need to discuss them, with our friends and see what we can do about it. Number one, when you have somebody like Rumsfeld, he's literally king of the roost, and what he says goes. And they say, well, gee, we're having a lot of problems. We're having prisoner abuses. We're squashing the things that are going on. He says, fine. He says, let's set up an investigation. He hires his cronies to do the investigation. They go out and say, well, gee, yeah, there are problems, but we're sentencing the young enlisted men to prison, so I think we pretty well have it under control, and certainly Mr. Rumsfeld is not at fault here. We need something like the 9/11 Commission that are civilian-oriented, who can ask questions and subpoena. Number two, we need to have some sort of ombudsman thing in the service, and it needs to be right down to the battalion level, that if somebody isn't getting due course from the military law system, that they can go to the ombudsman, who will be a civilian person who is familiar with military law, and he can at least tell his case to that. Then they can refer it on to the correct civilian people who can diagnose this and see what's happening, and then get this thing set up straight. Too often this stuff is swept under the rug, people are transferred out of their units, and these poor guys are, have had these problems that are not answered. Their self-esteem is shattered, they go out in the civilian life and they can't adjust. Why do you think 50% of the homeless out there are veterans? It's because things happen to them in the service that are so horrific, and they cannot adapt to it because they aren't getting these things, straightened out by the military. So we need an ombudsman to come in here and do something about that. That needs to happen. And the final thing is we need to face the biggest atrocity of all. In the past 40 or 50 years, we've just had one bogus war after another brought to us by the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about. That's the greatest atrocity there, is to send our young men and our young women out to war. Send them to fight these bogus wars that have no value to us and great value to the people who supply the arms and munitions for them. And what they do to take care of our young men and women who go to that war? Not a whole lot. They're closing the veteran system. They don't provide an ombudsman system that's straightened out, and they give a free hand to somebody like Mr. Rumsfeld. I say let's stop it now. Plant these seeds of doubt in the minds of people you know. Okay, I'm done ranting and raving.
As I was telling you, it's the third time I ran into her. Just this week.
Hey Martin, how you doing? All right, good to hear.
Yeah, that's I know what I'm going to do. Jimmy? Yeah, well, I'm just going to try.
Jimmy married and had a son. Now he's almost 7 years old. He moved to Switzerland. Tommy,
How much money?
we get to know Vietnam, move on and rebuild their life in the country. However, over here, people still go on every day on the news about it. So what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, I know, Jessie Marie, who runs the Athletic Youth Group, her father went and... With you? I don't know. I gotta find out. Chris Wagner.